Good evening. My name is Myron Barnstone, and I'd like to welcome you to the Barnstone Studios. This is the 34th meeting of my color course. I only teach it once a year, and probably the reason for that is there is so much homework people need to plan long in advance before they take this course. You're going to be working for 25 or more hours a week to do the assignments if you hope to benefit from them. I've had many art teachers say they wish they could afford to teach a course as demanding as this and as rich in information, but their students unfortunately have 4 or 5 other courses and they can't expect them to give up all the amount of time that a course like this will take. So you've been forewarned. It's a time-consuming commitment. And all I can tell you is that I wish that when I went to art school, I'd gotten more information about color than I got from the faculty. I went to the Ruskin School of Drawing at the University of Oxford in England. And one of my dear instructors was Jeffrey Rhodes, and God bless him. He told me that if I mixed Naples yellow with French ultramarine, I would get some perfectly beautiful grays. And that was the extent of the instruction in mixing pigment that we were given, that I was given. Had he told me that in a color wheel, like this or this, any 5 intervals, the yellow with the blue violet was yellow ochre and French ultramarine, but it could have been orange and blue violet. That too would have given me a beautiful range of neutrals. Unfortunately, art schools, and some of you have been to art schools, tend to tell students that they should mix complementary opposites to get neutrals. Wrong. You never mix complementary opposites to get neutrals, because the product of complementary opposites is mud. And this kind of mud we affectionately called cacadois when we were in the Ruskin, because it does resemble goose you-know-what. And there was a lot of that to be had on the palates of the students there. And it was very frustrating. It seemed like there was something in the way of information we needed. And I happened to have met a banking student at Oxford. He was studying at Martin's Bank Limited in Carfax, which was one of the big intersections in Oxford. And he and I went to an opening of a friend of his, John Mason, who was having a show in London. And we drove to London in a pea soup fog that would have delighted Sherlock Holmes. I mean, it was spooky. I was leaning out of his ancient Mercedes diesel, watching the yellow line under the car, hoping we didn't drive off the road. And when we got to the gallery in London, there were an awful lot of people, and the paintings were substantial in size, and I was simply overwhelmed. They were all non-figurative paintings. He was an abstract painter. But each and every painting had its own mood. It was a warm painting or a cool painting. The color was unified and quiet or very strong. The authority he had over value, the intensity of color, the compositions. Well, I was bowled over. So my German friend Carl introduced me to John, and we had a few minutes to talk, and I told him that I'm at the Ruskin, wallowing in cacadois, very frustrated, because I just don't know how to go about cleaning up a palette. And I've only been told to choose a few colors that I find interesting or pleasant and experiment. Some art schools have you mix pages and pages of mixtures covering sheet after sheet after sheet with colors. But we didn't even get that. Not that I think that's useful. I don't think it's at all useful. But in any event, he and I spoke, and he said, look, he said, thank you for the kind words you've said about my work. I'm thrilled that you think it's good. Meet me at the Anchor Pub, because I live right around the corner from you in Oxford. Meet me at the Anchor Pub tomorrow night, and I'll give you something. And you'll discover that you too can paint, or at least can create the kind of color I'm creating, because this doesn't come from nowhere. This is the product of somebody's hard work and study, and there's a book. So the following night, I ordered an English pint of bitter. John showed up, and he handed me a very thin, brown paper wrapped, obvious little book. He said, this is it, tapping it. I said, well, what do I owe you? He said, just promise you'll share it. Well, I have lectured once a year for 34 years. That year at the Ruskin, I was teaching color because I had information. I was experimenting with it, and I'd never been so excited with anything in my life, because if you go to the local art store and look at the racks and racks and racks of color, there might be 15 different cerulean blues if there are 15 different brands, phthalo blues and Prussian blues. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. How do you choose? You know, most art students have cadmium colors and burnt umber and raw umber on their palette. They don't belong in the same house. It's like garlic in a chocolate cake. They don't belong in the same house. So suddenly I had something to read that threw light on the whole situation. The book was Frank Morley Fletcher's Palette Control. And what Morley Fletcher does is he says, in the first instance, let's look at the palettes of portrait painters. And the reason we can look at the palettes of portrait painters is that as often as not, when a portrait painter does a self-portrait, they stand there with their thumbs sticking out of their palette, and you can see the array of colors that they've spread out on their palette. So you know what colors they have. And you can see that there are flesh tones running down as tints in one row with white added to them, and as tones in another row with black added to them. And the palette is covered with all kinds of preliminary mixtures. Recently, somebody gave me a DVD of a portrait painter, and he spends 40 minutes showing you how to prepare a palette. That was standard. And before the advent of commercially available color in tin tubes, artists had to grind their own color, which meant that they could guarantee that the texture, the viscosity, the intensity of everything that laid on their palette was bespoke, tailor-made to their desires and needs. Now we can buy our color at the color shop. That isn't such a good thing all the time, because the manufacturers of these colors put more oil in the tube than you need, but they don't want the people selling the tube of paint to complain that it goes dry on the shelf and they have to throw it away. So there's a compromise if you're not mixing your own color. Often you buy color and you squeeze it out on a paper towel and let the excess of oil get sucked up and out of the way. So here suddenly, Fletcher's explaining all the things one needs to know. What are they? First of all, there are various levels of intensity of color. Various levels of intensity of color. The cadmium colors are light and extremely powerful, very intense. Cadmium yellow, cadmium red, cadmium orange. These are very, very strong colors. Cerulean blue, You've got a list, I've handed it out, the list of a middle intensity palette. And we're only going to work in that middle intensity palette. And the middle intensity palette starts with yellow ochre that we add a little cadmium yellow to raise it a little bit. Because yellow ochre is a bit earthy and not really strong enough for our needs. And we have to do the same thing with the pointed orange. Because at orange we use burnt sienna. Burnt means orange. Raw sienna means yellow. So we use burnt sienna and we add cadmium orange to it to tune it up. So we need 3 or 4 levels of intensity. The highest level, the cadmium colors, would be serviceable for painting an outdoor scene in full sunlight in South Carolina in the middle of the summer, around the Côte d'Azur in July. The sun is pounding down, the colors are intense, there are lots of colorful shrubs and flowers, the houses are brightly painted in color. You need high intensity color for this. When Monet goes to Holland in the middle of the winter, the strongest yellow he lays out is raw umber. It looks brown, it looks almost black, but it's yellow. Remember I said raw was yellow. His oranges would be burnt sienna, burnt umber. The red would be Indian red. The red orange would be Venetian red. His green would be terra verte. Now terra means earth. So this is really an earth. Very, very weak because the sun is behind an overcast sky, if it's even around. You know, the nights in winter in England and Holland last for about 3 days. And then you get a blip and that was daylight sunshine. You know, these countries are way up north. So if you understand that color exists on various plateaus, I think of it as having 3. The high intensity colors for summer landscape in the south of France would be your high intensity palette. The middle intensity palette would be the one we normally use. And I've given you a list of those colors on this handout. And because we are recording this to produce a series of DVDs, these handouts will be on a CD at the end of the DVDs, which is exactly what we did with my drawing essays in the DVD series on drawing. So we have a high intensity palette, a middle intensity palette, and then a low intensity palette, and one even deeper than that. And I will be laying these colors out shortly so you can see a cascade of yellows, a cascade of oranges, a cascade of blues, and understand how they can be used. But if you're going, now, you know, I've been to the Met, and in walking around, I see some young art student standing in front of a Velázquez, copying it. And I look at their palette, there's cadmium orange, there's cadmium red, there's cadmium green. These colors weren't invented until the 19th century with the Industrial Revolution. They have no business on this palette. Then the painting that they're copying is in a Route 3, and they're working in a Route 5. They don't know anything about design. Far be it from me to open my mouth. They probably punch you. They're concerned with creativity or whatever it is they're doing there. I don't know. But the point is, you need information, and this text by Fletcher offers you that. So I'm going to lean very heavily on it. I'm going to be relying on it because it opened the door for me, but there's much that Fletcher does not discuss and explain adequately, and I'm hoping that I can fill those gaps. I do have the text here, and for those of you who wish to purchase it, it's very reasonably priced, and we can talk about that later. We're going to be using very expensive materials. You don't need to buy expensive paint. These are student exercises. We're going to be using Canvatex paper. It's inexpensive. It doesn't last forever. The paint doesn't last forever. It doesn't matter. What you want is the experience of the mixing and organizing it and learning what these palettes will do. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go on the blackboard and I'm going to describe a very useful fairly standard palette that can be used for almost any indoor painting. Again, it won't be suitable for outdoor painting in the summertime or maybe in the heart of winter, but for most of our needs, it's ideal. If you look around at those in the audience sitting near you, you won't see any strong color. The strongest color is this red sweater. And if you squint and look at it, what you're going to discover is that it's only strong where the light hits it. Everything else is what I'm going to be referring to as neutral. Now, neutral means grade, reduced in intensity, not pure. So there's really nothing in that sweater that's going to be pure. It's got to be really dropped down. Now, we're in a room with a lot of auxiliary lights in it, which is making that even more intense than it would normally be if this lighting were a fairly standard light without the advantage of these arc lights, etc. So let's look at what Fletcher offers us in the way of a schematic approach to thinking about a color wheel. Now, the color wheel is a map that you have to burn into your optic nerve. You have to be able to close your eyes and picture this wheel of 12 notes. There are other color wheels. This is the way I'm using. This is what I'm using. It's the one Fletcher uses, and it's serviceable. All right. Let me add this. When Fletcher wrote palette control, this information was in the air. The Delannays in Paris were writing similarly. There were people in the United States associated with Robert Henry, and there was a Dr. Ross from Harvard who was also writing color theory. Very similar to this. Franklin McDonald Wright was writing a color theory that was almost identical. It was in the air. And what happened was this. There had been a Goublon tapestry works in France that had fallen into disrepair, was pretty much abandoned. In its heyday, the greatest artists in the world did paintings which were called cartoons that the tapestry works wove into magnificent tapestries. The place had declined. And there was a scientist by the name of Chevril, a Frenchman. And he was appointed by the king to go to Goublon and to see if it could be resurrected. Well, he didn't know anything about color necessarily, but he was going to find out. And he developed all kinds of schemes to understand color. And what he discovered was that in tapestry, you mix a yellow with a red thread, a yellow and a red thread, and when you stand back, it looks orange. So you can create all kinds of nuances of color by the colors you weave together and see simultaneously. And what this does is it causes you to perceive in your optic nerve, I guess that's where it's hiding, the desired color that the weaver wanted you to see. They've had a good deal of experience. Well, Chevril became fascinated with this. And he ended up writing one of the most important texts on color ever written by anyone. And the beauty was, it was written at a time when the Industrial Revolution had provided the artist, by pure accident, with a wider range of color than artists had ever had. Ever had. Up until the end of the 18th century, the beginning of the 19th century, artists had the same colors the Egyptians had 2,000 years before the day of Christ. Earth's yellow ochre, raw sienna, burnt umber. Maybe they killed some butterflies someplace and scraped some bugs and they had vermilion. They had lapis lazuli, which was ground up. They just didn't have much color. You wanted blue, you mixed white and black, you've got a cool black and a little green. And if you placed it beside oranges, warm, burnt umbers and so forth, it looked blue. Blue is expensive. Lapis, I mean, boy, it was expensive. You had to get your colors from, you had to get these minerals from a chemist. Then you had to hope they didn't give you aconite, which looked like it but turned black. So it was a tough game, but no one had much in the way of color. And then suddenly in the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution overtakes the artist market, and you have cadmium colors, Mars colors, cold derivative colors. Suddenly you have phthalo colors. Good grief. Now, nobody's inventing these for the artist. They're discoveries being made by industry and being immediately employed to color chewing gum and who knows what. Industry needed color. And everything was happening during the Industrial Revolution anyway. But there was the artist out in the street watching what fell off the Industrial Revolution's truck, and they were picking up all of these intense colors, and Chevrill's book suddenly became the Bible. He was telling you how to use color. He was breaking it down into levels of intensity. He was creating groups of color, cascades. And who were the first to read his books? Seurat, Signac, and Matisse. Think about these people. Suddenly, they had this powerful color. It was available in the shops. Suddenly, they had color theory. And it was so incredibly exciting. These people were painting slapdash, junk, and then rushing off to their bistro to sit around and show each other what they were doing. They were overwhelmed with it. They were just experimenting. They were understanding complementary opposites, split complements. They were understanding value, intensity. What a wave of excitement went through the art world. So you had the vorticists in Russia, you had the futurists in Italy, you had the cubists and the fauves in France. Even my Uncle Oscar in New York City was playing with this stuff, okay? This was covering the whole world. And people were writing. There was a fellow by the name of Jacobs who was teaching at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, and he wrote his own book on the subject, and he was teaching it there. So there was all of this excitement. The book that John Mason gave me in the Anchor Pub in Oxford opened all of this up. And suddenly I wasn't in the dark. Suddenly I could lay out color intelligently, not like the person at the Met who had cadmiums on a palette that was supposed to be laid out to copy Velázquez, which was brown school earth colors. I could intelligently lay out a palette. If I wanted to paint high, intense color, I knew how to do that. It could be done deliberately. Boy, what an exhilarating feeling to feel that you have information and you understand what you're doing. And you understand that when you go to the museums and you look at paintings, you never see anybody painting with raw color. Every touch of color that's put on a canvas has been modified. As often as not, it's a tertiary mixture, meaning it's composed of 3 pigments. Now you have to understand that when you mix pigments, the product of 2 pigments mixed together produces a color that's less intense than the 2 originals. Mixing pigment is subtractive. Now, many books on color for artists tend to dwell on colored light. That's no good. When you mix colored light, the product of 2 colored gels is stronger than the individual elements, which is no good. It might be a fact, and it might help you if you're interested in the theory of colored light, but unless you're illuminating a stage set, it doesn't do much good for you in painting. So mixing color means that the product of any 2 or 3 colors is going to be less strong than any of the elements in the mix, subtractive. And If your scene is brightly lit, you want intense color. If it's softly lit, the way even with these lights in this room, the color in this room is, it's going to be middle intensity palette. If it's darker and quiet, and most of the room's in shadow, like so many Dutch interiors, it's going to be very earthy and quiet and dark and weak color. So the light falling on your subject determines what you're doing. You know, you get Vermeer, who didn't have much in the way of strong color. He had vermilion, and he had a few blues. But oh, he was such a master of managing contrast and value and intensity that his paintings are full of light. They radiate light, just the way Venetians radiate light. The sun was strong, certainly not in Holland. The houses were small, the windows were small. They didn't want big windows because it was a long, hard, cold winter, and big windows were full of drafts. You wanted to be protected against the inclement weather that was traditional in Holland. So the interiors tended to be dark. There are little masters in the 17th and 18th century who painted interiors of pubs and bars and homes. And they were dark little scenes around a fireplace. Or a couple was, you know, the Vermeer woman with the pearl or pouring the milk is standing by a window, and the light is golden because it's flooding in the window. They were masterful. They were masterful. But they were all painted in brown school, meaning you start the painting with burnt sienna and burnt umber washes, and you don't make the underpainting too dark, because when you paint on top of it with glazes and scumbling color, you reduce the amount of light reflecting back up through your pigment. And when you do that, as paint ages and becomes more transparent, if it's dark underneath, your color goes dark. I was at an exhibition at the Allentown Museum many years ago. McElhaney was a very wealthy gentleman in Philadelphia who was going to lend his collection of paintings, which he usually put in a vault when he went to Ireland to summer in his castle. He was an old Irishman. And Richard Gregg, the director of the Allentown Museum, bargained with him and said, well, we'll pay the insurance. Let us, instead of putting it in a bank vault, give it to us. We don't often have marvelous collections like this. So he agreed. And here I am, I'm staring at a painting and it says, huntsmen and animals in a forest. It's 17th century, all I can see are trees. It's a forest. I can't see any huntsmen, I can't see animals, and I'm staring at this painting. And slowly I adjust, my sight adjusts to this dark, dark painting. And I realize what's going on. The idiot who painted it painted the forest. Then he painted hunters and their dogs and stags running all over the place. He added varnish to the paint so that the paint on top of the forest was transparent. And as it aged, it became weaker. And if you didn't get your nose right up against the canvas, except where there's a slight thickening of his painting on these figures, you'd never know they existed. Well, the lesson is, you paint the figures along with the forest, and you make sure there's nothing underneath the figures, so that when the paint becomes more transparent, they become more intense. The light bounces back up, and your figures don't disappear into a dark background. But they made a dark underpainting, they painted a dark forest, and they painted dark figures on top of it. If there were figures there, you'd have to spend a long time adjusting to the light before you saw even one. There are excellent books on painting technique. The Ralph Mayer was the Bible when I was a student. We have it, and we have a dozen other such books in the library here at the studios. If you're going to paint in oils, you should own one or two of these books. My recommendation is you read them from cover to cover, simply to familiarize yourself what's in them. And then when a problem comes up, you'll remember that you read something about this, and it was about halfway through the book, and you open the book and you can now, that it's important to you, review the material and know what to do. So there are no mysteries about the process of how you mix color, how you lay it down, how you guarantee that it will be long-lived, and which pigments should absolutely not be mixed together because they're chemicals. And if you mix them surreptitiously together, they will have a chemical interaction. They'll blossom, they'll break, they'll bubble. They'll ruin your painting. In the 19th century, even Marager, the great authority on color, and he was the restorer for the Louvre, used McGilp. You don't use McGilp. It's lousy stuff. It's got wonderful working properties, but the paintings you do with it deteriorate. They bubble and they crack and they snap, pop, and whistle, but that's not really what you want paintings to do. So if you're armed with an understanding of colored pigments and how you can categorize them, so you select the right groups together, and then you have the information I'm about to give you on how you set up a palette that allows you to paint in a key, like music. And the basis and secret of painting in keys, like music, is a triad. So you have two colors that are closer together in that triad. In this case, we're in the key of orange. So we have orange, violet, and blue-green. And 90% of the painting is going to have violet, blue-violet, and blue-green in it. It's going to be painted from that portion of your color wheel. So because it's a warm key, meaning the accented color that's important is orange. Now we're in a middle intensity palette, so that orange is going to be the product of burnt sienna with a bit of cadmium orange added to it. It's going to be a beigey sort of orange. It's not going to be the kind of orange you'd expect to see in flowers. It's a quiet orange. It's like what you'd find in flesh tones in a pretty girl's face. 90% of it's going to be a cool painting with a warm note. So the way I simplify this, and I think it's a good way of thinking about a painting, is to imagine that your colors are a chorus. And if you're sitting in a theater and a chorus comes onto the stage, all these people walk on with deep, dark, purple robes. And they arrange themselves, and they're very quiet, and then some singer comes out in a white robe. Well, the symbolism is this is the soloist. Now, if this white-robed figure doesn't sing the solo, you're going to be confused. If the solo is being sung by somebody in the back row, you've been misled. This is bait and switch. Makes no sense. It violates your expectation. The chorus in a warm key, the key of orange, is going to be in that cool robe. 90% of the song is sung by 90% of the group, and the soloist gives you the melody and the high notes and the subject of your color. Now you're going to understand that color has three distinct properties in this class. And Fletcher gives them to us so very simply. It's wonderful. He says a color possesses temperature. And by temperature he means it's yellow or green or blue or red. Then he says it's going to have value. That means it's light or it's dark, as a gray. And then he says it's going to have intensity. He even gives us a code. Let's look at the board a moment. I'll show you. Orange. Orange is 10 o'clock. So if we point to 10 o'clock, and we put this here to indicate that this is neutral, that's dead gray. All right? And what we've done is we've said this is pointing to the temperature orange. Color, hue, whatever you wish. Now, if this is gray and this is maximum intensity right out of the tube, and we're not using the color raw out of the tube, and if we place a bar here, we're saying it's a middle low intensity orange. So you could take burnt sienna, add a tiny bit of cadmium orange to it, mix it, and then, because you have a neutral gray, which I'll introduce to you shortly, you add that to it to reduce its intensity, and now you have a very delicate, low intensity orange. Okay? We don't use the word brown, but browns are orange. Okay? They're red oranges and they're oranges. Then, let's say we put a numeral beside it. I'm sorry I don't have it up here. Normally, Alex, in my drawer with the pencils, there should be some grayscale charts. Would you bring me one, please? Just underneath the pencils. So we have a grayscale from white to black. And what we'll do is we'll use a 9-step grayscale. And I ask you to make white 1. Others might make it 9. You'll do whatever the teacher asks you to do. Here, 1 is white, 9 is black. In truth, we never use white and we never use black in a painting. We have no use for them. They have no color qualities. So we're saying this is a number 4 value, orange, of middle low intensity. And we know it's in a middle intensity palette. We're not using cadmium orange, that's high intensity. And we're not using burnt umber, that's very low intensity. But we're tuning it. And now we're starting to see what goes on. We can't discuss a color unless we decide what key it's in. So let's look at this palette. And it's got orange, blue, green, violet. And I'm going to do this here to indicate that this is the key. Now, I have only 3 colors. It's a middle intensity palette, so I'm using burnt sienna with cadmium orange added to it. I'm using phthalo blue with a little viridian added to it because phthalo's too strong. So you don't want to use phthalo straight. It overwhelms monastral colors. For the violet, I'm going to take a French ultramarine and ultramarine, and not a French ultramarine and alizarin crimson, red violet and blue violet. I mix them together and I get a violet. Fletcher calls this tuning. Now, almost none of the colors coming out of a tube hit exactly where you want them on the color wheel, so you will have to adjust them. And the point I made earlier was that different manufacturers of different colors produce pigments that, for instance, with orange, are more red than others, more yellow than others. They vary considerably. Some are cadmium orange, but they are less intense than others. Do you see what I'm getting at? So you can adjust them. marginally. It doesn't take much. One of the things you're going to learn from this course is what a true orange is and what a yellow-green is and what a blue-violet really is. And you're going to be able to duplicate them and think in terms of color, because this is a highly disciplined, orderly procedure that gives you the freedom of being able to solve problems effectively. And art is about solving problems just the way every other human enterprise is. You know, if you go to hell, and I know because I've been there, there's this little nightclub. And all of the greatest painters are there. They wouldn't be caught dead in heaven. And this nightclub looks just like Hess's patio. Oh yeah, the waitresses wear Hess's, and they bring you your drinks in little ovens. Oh yeah, yeah. And they've got that multicolored sugar. But the idea is all these painters end up in hell. And when they arrive at the door to the patio, all the old boys look up. There's Leonardo, Raphael, Michelangelo is chewing on a cigar, you know. They all look up to see who's coming. And the newcomer is praying that they'll invite him in. Because if the newcomer is Jackson Pollock, they don't invite him. You know, they just look away. They aren't interested. But if he's Morandi or Picasso or any of these great artists, Richard Diebenkorn, they're delighted to see him, and they invite him in, and they get him an adult beverage. I mean, you can't do better than that. But there is a hierarchy. And artists live with ghosts. Composers live with ghosts. Authors live with ghosts. Poets live with ghosts. They converse with them in their dreams. They feel they're looking over their shoulders. They would hope that their work, their art, their craft wins the approval of the great artists in their field that they've read, studied, and admired. And believe you me, you're measuring yourself against the past all the time. Imagine Picasso waking up in the morning, seeing himself in the mirror, and his reflection says, okay, wise God, how are you going to wow them today? You know, you've got this marvelous reputation, but it's only as good as long as you're effective and innovative and genuinely creative. And the minute you start duplicating yourself, copying yourself, everybody's going to leave the room. So you are going to have to get one of these grayscales, because these are the values that determine how light or dark the color you mix will be. And that's represented by a number. The intensity would be how strong or weak it is, and the temperature would be the point on the color wheel, blue, violet, or green. And I'm using temperature because that's what Fletcher uses. So Fletcher says, you take these pigments, Viridian, maybe a little phthalo green. You've mixed alizarin crimson with French ultramarine for violet. You've tuned burnt sienna, which is too dark, with some cadmium orange, and now you have a middle intensity orange. And the next thing you do is you mix all three of these together and you place it here with more of those two and less of this. Now, because what we're about to produce is a black, you won't use any cadmium orange in your orange. You'll use burnt umber. You'll go to the lowest, darkest orange in the scale because you want a black that's black. And if you put cadmium orange in it, they're both orange, it's lighter and it will make this too light. Do you see what you're after? So the neutral has to be based on the darkest of the lighter colors. You mix this up, and we're going to call this neutral. And you add white to that, off to the side, just a little of it. I'm going to be doing this shortly, you'll be able to see. But you add a little white to that to make sure that it's a little on the cool side, because in this palette we want these cool colors to enhance our warm. So we take out insurance. If it's too warm or neutral, it will weaken the warm note in the orange. We want the chorus to be in that dark blue, blue-violet robe. And if somebody shows up in a red robe and somebody in an orange robe, we're no longer paying attention to the principal singer. They're being competed with, and you can't tell who's who. And then if, God forbid, all of these different robes are singing a different song, you leave. And most paintings look like that. Nobody knows what they're doing. They don't have a clue. Now, there's some problems with this. We've got high intensity pure colors at these 3 points and nowhere else. Well, we're going to need more colors, aren't we? So look what we can do immediately. If we mix the 3 together, we got this neutral. If we mix blue, green, and orange together, we get a yellow. It's going to be very weak. It's going to be very weak because this map that you're going to memorize gives you all the information you need. If I draw a line from here to there, that yellow, this is neutral, remember. This is middle yellow, middle level intensity, very close to neutral. And let's say I make it a 6 value. It's fairly dark. Okay? Fairly dark. If I mix violet with orange, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 intervals. It's going to be more intense than this because this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Do you see it? We have to span a wider area, and that brings it closer to neutral. Oh, this is gorgeous. I mean, you look at any of these symbols and you know exactly what you're dealing with. There are a couple of questions you have to ask. You have to say, what key are you in? Orange, but it could be one of 2. This is orange, violet, blue, green, but you flip that figure over and it goes orange, blue, violet, green. Fletcher calls one clockwise and one counterclockwise. That isn't important. When you play with it, you'll begin to realize there are different qualities of color from each of these. My recommendation is stay with this key for 6 months or a year. Fletcher's giving you variety. You can, in fact, create 96 different keys in this program. So by teaching you Fletcher, I'm not denying you anything. I'm giving you authority over a wider range of color than on your own, you would have never discovered in a dozen lifetimes. But I'm asking you to stay with one long enough to really understand it. It's a stick shift. You get so you drive unconsciously, you can change level of intensity, you can change from yellow to green to blue to orange to anything you want. They all behave similarly in either a clockwise or a counterclockwise system, but because you've really learned how to play with a stick shift, you're in charge. It's easy. And you will choose the color key based on the principal color in the painting you wish to execute. So you'll be making informed decisions that have a direct bearing on your personal goals. That's called authority. That presumes understanding. That guarantees that you've got authority and skill over the material. That's all good. The idea that you choose a few colors that you like and experiment with them is a fool's game. Painters didn't do this. They inherited a tradition in their craft. They were landscape, portrait painters, still life. There were things that they were taught to do by their masters. Remember, it took them 10 years in the company of a master as an apprentice to learn their trade. They stood on solid ground. During their lifetime, they innovated, they created new ideas, they built a name for themselves, and they added to the tradition. That's why they could drink adult beverages in hell. Okay? You understand? You have to be memorable, and you have to do something useful. So we now have a mixture of violet and blue-green. It's not going to be as strong as these two, but it's going to be stronger than any of those because there are only 3 steps between them. So now we have a palette with 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 bits of color. Not bad. And if we mix this with this, we get an orange-yellow. We mix it with this, we get a yellow-green. We mix these two together, we get a very strong blue. Begin to see what's going on. And we can get all kinds of things here, too. We can get a blue-green at that point that's stunning. Stop looking at the colors in a Van Gogh. Nothing is raw. Look past what you see on the surface. His underpaintings were brilliant. He understood color theory, as did Monet, Manet, all of these people, Fontaine-Latour. They knew what they were doing. They weren't scribbling. Let's hopefully, toward the end of the semester, have a group of you get on the bus and go into the Met and spend the afternoon in the French 19th century room looking at painters who were besotted with color, who were using these kinds of ideas to solve their problems. The Fauves, the Nabis, Vuillard, Bonnat. Oh boy, get close to Seurat. You can't believe the authority he had over color. Signac was a hack, but all right. He hung out in good company. Gauguin, Van Gogh. The early Matisse is magnificent, the last is terrible. I think that Picasso was friendly with Matisse because Picasso needed a beast to make him look beautiful. And no one could have done a better job of being beast to Picasso's beauty than Henri Matisse, let me tell you. And I'm sure that Picasso just played him along. He didn't really care. I'm going to start mixing color. Now I said we have to tune colors. So first of all, we have to create the basic triad. Right off the bat, French ultramarine serves as blue-violet. Probably need a little more because I've got to have enough to make a central neutral. The green, I'm going to take Viridian, and it's fairly weak, it's not very intense. So should I need to make it stronger, I have phthalo blue, which is outrageously powerful. Now watch, and I'll show you what I mean by that. If I take a little of this green and I spread it out, you can see it's quiet. If I take a little of this and spread it out, you can see how powerful it is. Now, this is more intense than that. So when I talk about color intensity, I'm talking about strength. And here's a perfect example of what strong color is and what less strong color is. So you want to be very careful about this, because let me tell you, it can find its way into every mixture and destroy your whole key, destroy all your color by virtue of its overwhelming strength. Because this has been designed by industry to paint automobiles. It hasn't been designed for you. And if you're not careful, it will ruin everything you do. Now, when I add white to the Viridian, I get a very delicate, pure, quiet blue-green. Okay? If I add some white to the phthalo, it is still overwhelmingly powerful. You probably wouldn't use anything that strong in any painting you might do. But we'll leave it here for the time being, just so you understand what I mean by high and low intensity color.
Is that a phthalo blue?
This is phthalo blue-green. Phthalo green.
Phthalo green.
Right. So I don't have to tune this. I just have to make it a mixture between the Viridian and the phthalo green, because the phthalo is much too powerful. Probably the Viridian will serve for almost all of my needs. But it's given me an opportunity to show you the difference between intensities, even though this is more blue than the phthalo, which in this case is closer to pure green. If you wish to straighten this up a little more, you could add a little yellow to it, or a little yellow-green, all right? Which is the next color down. The blue-violet I add a little white to these so that I reveal their appearance. The French ultramarine right out of the tube looks black. So by using a little white, it reveals where it really falls on the color wheel. And I've made it probably a number 5 value, all right, by adding white to it. But we need to be able to see it. Now when it comes to, and you just put this here, please. When it comes to the orange, the red orange, which we have to tune, I'm going to lay out a little orange, and you can see, compared to that Viridian, it is very, very strong. It's also very light. Then, if I use Venetian red, it's a low intensity red orange. I'm going to set it here. And to reveal its color, its property, I am once again going to add a little white to it. It's a little on the common side. It's a little violet, isn't it? A little red violet going down toward red. So if I add a little orange to this, I can lighten it and maybe pull it back to a more suitable red orange, and I think I've done this. Okay? Now, it's low in intensity and low in value compared to what we saw with the cadmium orange. True? The terms are starting to make sense. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to take a sample of that, and I've got a red-orange now. I'm content that this is serviceable. So I'm going to just set this over here for the time being. We've got the French ultramarine. Now, I'm going to take the Viridian, a little phthalo, not much, I'm going to take the French ultramarine, so I'm going to mix this, and I'm getting a blue, green, blue here. See it? I need some more strong green here, so I'm going to go to my phthalo. See, this is very powerful. So just for the sake of it, I'm going to add a little white to it, and I'm going to say it's a mix of those two, and it would be right there. So it's blue, a little on the green side. I'll set it over here. That's about where it would fall. It's nice. We know how to get that color, and we know exactly where it falls on the wheel in this particular key. So now, I've got to come in with my red-orange, and I've got burnt umber. Burnt meant orange, raw meant yellow. So this is a very low orange, very dark. I want it to be red-orange. So I'm going to come in with Venetian red, which is a red-orange. So I'm going to bring in some of this. Now, this is a little light, remember? But I don't need black, so it's okay. So this is orange, and I know this is stronger than any of these warms, so I don't have to add much of that. And remember, what I'm seeking to do is to create black. Now, I told you earlier that I could mix 96 different keys. That means there are 96 different blacks I can create. I'm talking about authority. Incredible. If you are interested in color, boy, have you got a feast waiting for you. So here this is, and it looks a little to me like it's a little too warm, so I'm going to add a little more of the cool over here. And I won't know what I've mixed up really until I add white to it. Okay, so I'll just wipe this, and I'll come in with this, and let's see what this neutral looks like. Now that's a happy gray, isn't it? That's not bad. In fact, it would make Goldilocks a happy, smiling chick, wouldn't it? This isn't too warm and it isn't too cool. Como se dice, it's just right, isn't that it? So, if we add more white to it, we're starting to get a hint of coolness in this, aren't we? Feel it? What a pretty gray. And if we want to warm it up, how's that for the lips on the face of a pretty girl? Delicate, not bad. You didn't think I could do that, did you? Did you see the flesh tone possibilities, the delicacy of what you can play with? Nobody's using strong color. Not bad. If I would rather cool it, I could, thank you very much, I could come in and again I have to add a little white to it. See it shift. I'm saying that you can begin to understand these incredibly delicate nuances of temperature change. This is neutral, that's neutral going toward red-orange. This is neutral going toward a cool. Boy, you can tweak this any way you wish. I'm going to show you some paintings of garden scenes. Everything is a tertiary mix. Everything is three colors. Everything is highly neutralized. You think about Monet as a painter of very strong color. First of all, he added white to everything. That knocks the color down, makes it chalky. Then he mixed 2 or 3 colors together, that dropped it down in even lower intensity. So when you see his paintings, what strikes you as being strong color is the relationship of the underpainting making the overpainting roar, and the delicate relationship of the two. I was in Oxford. Did I mention that? And I met a fellow by the name of Bill Scobie. He was at a working man's college that was down Beaumont Street from the Ruskin School of Drawing where I was studying, and we became very good friends. And one afternoon, Bill said, "Meet me in front of the Ashmolean. I'm going to give you the time of your life. We're going out to see some friends of mine." I met him, and we took the bus out a mile or two. And we stopped and we went into a garden of a house that was incredibly modern. You got to remember, the colleges in the University of Oxford go back sometimes to the 11th and 12th century. It was a Gothic city. Spires everywhere, very exotic for a kid from Portland, Maine. Wasn't I lucky to have an opportunity to live 3 years in Oxford? And we knocked on the door and we were invited in, and there was a doctor of Oriental Studies on the faculty at Oxford. He was a Jew, which was important to the story because his family had just barely snuck out of Germany before all of their other relatives were cooked by the fascists. And when they left, they took with them a collection of paintings that their father had put together while he was a law student in Paris shortly after the First World War. So they had Cézannes and they had Monets, and their father was buying these from the painters because he hung out with them, and he was buying them for a price of a meal for their families. He was getting these masterpieces for a song. And what they did was they put the paintings, they took them off the stretchers, they put them in the lining of their suitcases, except for one very big one that was about 8 foot wide. They rolled that up in the oldest, dirtiest carpet they could find. And they quickly brought it to the attention of German customs. They said, "We're going to England to visit my aunt, my great aunt." And she painted this terrible painting. It was a sketch by Manet, an underpainting. It wasn't complete. She did this painting and gave it to us. And since we're moving to England, we feel we have to bring it. Can we take it through customs? He said, "Oh, take it." Well, we walked into this home. There were 2 Monets and a Cézanne over the fireplace. There were Fontainatours. There were more Monets. There were Pizarros. The whole period was celebrated in about 30 paintings. It was to see, and they apologized because many of their works were on tour. Their paintings were so famous that if somebody was doing an exhibition of Fontainatour, their piece was known, they were begged to let them tour, so it might not come back for 2 years. You know, it might go to Chicago and San Francisco and Paris, and then they get it back. I'm sitting there as the sun sets, and I'm watching these 2 Monets and the Cézanne over the fireplace completely change color. The sun is setting and the light is red-orange. And all the blues and blue violets are throbbing. The contrast between these split complementary colors is these paintings are singing a different song. And as the afternoon goes on and it becomes too dark and they put on artificial light, the paintings change again. The color changes again. And I commented on this, and they said, oh, you've got to come here in the spring. You've got to watch them and hear them sing a different song in the fall and midwinter, and the morning is different from sunset, and you have to live with these paintings. Well, I'd only seen paintings of this standard in museums, and they're lit. They can only sing one song. When the painter painted them, he painted them in a room with a north light. And he saw all of these changes, and he tweaked these changes, and this orchestra, this cooperation between changing light temperature and the colors on his canvas were the whole story. So many years later, I'm sitting at a dinner party with a gentleman who owns an electric lighting fixture operation in downtown Allentown, the largest, most successful in town. He's absolutely full of himself, and he's bragging about this wonderful collection of paintings he has. And I'm chewing the meal, getting increasingly more bored. He's really obnoxious. And what he's trying to impress me with is the fact that he has barn doors on the lights that shine on his paintings in his gallery at home, so that you can't see the light outside the frame. It's focused on the painting. Never changes. And he's telling me how expensive this was and how successful it is. I said, well, now I've had it. Now I've had it. I said, well, I don't know how successful it is. He said, what do you mean? I said, you've reduced, if your paintings are really good paintings, they sing a different song at different times of the day and during different seasons. And you've reduced every one of your pieces to Johnny Won't Note. It can only look one way underneath the temperature of the light you've shown on it. You'll never see what the painter had in mind. And for all practical purposes, you have caused it to become mute. And I got up and I walked away. Money didn't do it, you see. Money coupled with stupidity and ignorance didn't do these, if they were good pieces, any service at all. But sitting with this family, looking at this collection, and watching the light fade as evening approached was an extraordinary experience. And I did go back, and I went there for a late breakfast, and again at a different time of the year, and I saw how differently these paintings looked. Now, a lot of people today paint with so little understanding of layering color that it really doesn't much matter what the light is. They don't understand much of color theory either. The idea is you need an underpainting that's prepared for the final coat. And the underpainting is going to be subordinate to the final coat, which is the ultimate effect. You need a lot of information. You need to do a lot of experimenting, and you have to spend a lot of time in good museums and hopefully in the homes of people who have good paintings, studying the effect of light on these paintings. And if you can prepare the underpainting effectively, your overpaintings will be scintillating, and they will sing different songs in different light conditions. And then you want to make sure you've got a suitable changing light entering the room that you're hanging it in. And you will get the full benefit of all that was invested by a trained, knowledgeable artist. Most paintings today could have been painted with a household painting roller for doing walls. There's no interchange between overpainting and underpainting. Very often it's just one coat anyway, and it's smeared, and there's no understanding of color theory, and there's no sophisticated mixing methods. And it's really tragic how much has been lost. So that I delighted in, putting that fellow down. I thought he's going to go home and he's going to look at these and he's going to realize they've been crippled. He's reduced them to one song, one note, which is a shame. So if I come back here and I mix these two, I'm going to get a low intensity yellow. Green with red orange. Now it is so close to that neutral, don't expect it to look like any yellow you've seen before. All right? There's my yellow. Oh, that's a nice yellow. That's beige, isn't it? Hmm? Isn't that pretty? Isn't that delicate? If I want to bring this from there up to here, I take a little of this. This would be way up here. There we are. I compare these yellows to A Day at the Shore. The sand up the top of the beach is very yellow. It might look like this if it's dry. Then as you walk down toward the water, the content of water in the sand makes it darker, and then right where the water's lapping up on the beach, that yellow's gone as dark as this. They're all yellows. If I want to neutralize this more, I come in with this neutral, I mix it with that, how nice that is. Isn't that lovely? You've seen sand like that. Not bad. So this was a yellow, of all things. If I take the blue violet and I take some red orange, I'm going to get a red violet, aren't I? See, the blue violet is still too intense and it overwhelms the earthy red violet. Now remember, it can't be too intense. That's 1, 2, 3, 4 steps. Thank you. So let's add a little white to it and see what we have. It's a little too red, so what I need is a little bit of blue, and that's bringing it down toward a red violet. You with me? Okay. Now let's say I want a tint of this. Then we can add this to my flesh tones, can't I? And let's say I want to neutralize it a little bit more. Good grief. See how pink it's getting? You get the idea? Now what Fletcher says is you've got secondary mixtures here for red, violet, yellow, and blue, blue, green, right? So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 colors, but this is weak. If you want to strengthen this, he calls it a field, you add yellow. Now you can get stronger mixes in this field. If you need red violets and you need violets, you'll add alizarin crimson. And add a little alizarin crimson there for me, please, Katie. Just the tiniest touch. Aha, you see it's got all that oil. Doesn't matter. Go ahead, go ahead. I won't blame you. Okay. No, don't put the cap on until you wipe that. Just press it against a glass and it'll, there, pues muy bien, okay. So if I come in here, remember, this is more intense. If I bring that into this, see, it belongs. They are the same. But what I've just done is, what's the cook on TV when he,
Bam.
bam, okay, I did bam, all right? But you see how beautifully this increases, and then bam. Do you see it? Do you see how it works? I'm in that zone. I'm on a line from high intensity to neutral. I can bring this down even lower, but the transitions are going to be so smooth, so delicate. It's not going to be interrupted. I won't violate the integrity of red violet. Boy, that's good news. That's authority. Hey, you didn't know I could do that, did you? So this is what I have. If I need an orange, I can add it. But if I'm working a painting that's almost all in this area, and so far as I'm concerned, that blue is intense enough, I don't need a blue out there. I mean, this is only 3 steps. I don't need an additional blue. There are 2 approaches to art. One is the romantic, and one is the classical. And the classical artist is classical by temperament. He's trying to achieve the most he possibly can with the most economical of means. He's laying out the fewest colors to achieve his goal with color. And the romantic probably is of a similar temperament, but he's going to lay out an awful lot more color. So it's a difference between Mozart and Berlioz, Stravinsky and Rite of Spring, with a whole orchestra, and you've got a chorus and you've got a marching band and you've got elephants, and we're in the opera. That's over the top. Or you're listening to Palestrina and it's just as beautiful and simple, and it's the tiniest group playing and conversing about the music, and it's a pleasure to be in these people's company. So one is classical, and it's trying to achieve as much as it can with the least number of devices, and the other will throw in the kitchen sink. They're more interested in energy and the celebration. If I come in and oh, what a different gray this is. Do you see how cool it is compared to these warms? Do you see what I'm talking about? I'm talking about the most delicate shift of nuance, from warm to cool, from light to dark, from intense to neutral. I'm talking about, how many of you know Gwen Johns' work? You don't? Gwen Johns. She's an English painter. She lived in Paris most of her life. Very respectable painter. Later in the semester, I'll show some of her work. Okay, we want a red-orange painting, so I'm going to lay down a background. And I'm going to bring in a neutralized blue-violet. I don't want it to be too intense. One of the rules that when you read the Fletcher text that's going to come up is don't mix any of the colors here with any of the colors in the other field. He calls it surreptitious cross-mixing. You can mix anything inside that triangle, but here you stay in that triangle, all right? Here you stay in this one. And if you want intense colors up here and there, you'll stay there as well. So what I'm doing here is I'm coming up with something that's going to be cool, because we said that the chorus in this is cool because the soloist is warm. So I'm coming in with this. It certainly harmonizes, doesn't cause any trouble, and if I wish, I could, how you say, kick it up a notch. And I'm dropping it, I'm intensifying it, and I'm dropping it down a little bit in value, and I'm going to intensify it further. Michael, you've done a wonderful job. You know, you can add this to your resume, let me tell you. And then we're going to really, see, this is all analogous, they're all cool. Now, if I come in with this, that's pretty. If I come in with this, I've got a keynote, don't I? Not bad. Not bad. Now, if I want to make this light, I would come in here Hope you're watching the way I use the knife. You don't pat. You get it? Watch how this goes bright light. See it change? Now, not only did it go light, what color did it become? Tell me. What? You're getting close, but it's not green. It's going toward yellow-orange, which is the complementary opposite of that blue-violet. Do you see it? It's warm. It's warmer here than it is there. You feel it?
It's warmer on that edge.
Where it meets. Now, if I want to make it warmer still, I will cool its neighbor. That's warmer. The blue is making it look yellow-orange now. I want to make it look red. I could come in here. Enough. Enough. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit more about this palette. The colors these Egyptian artists used thousands of years ago are your earth colors. Burnt sienna, burnt umber, raw sienna, raw umber, yellow ochre, colors as weak as terra vert, an earth green. They had lapis, so they did have some cools, but for the most part, they're working with earth colors, oranges, yellows, and greens. The Japanese are using very neutral and delicate, principally in this values. I don't think there's any color in this at all. It probably is a colored screen or block print, but we have a black and white reproduction, so this is relying on value, lights, darks, and a game's being played where the light figure's up against something darker and the darks are up against something lighter. So this has carrying power. These figures, in contrast with the background, are thrown forward. If you use similar colors in your subject and the background, the likelihood is as you walk away from the piece, it hasn't the carrying power and you lose the image. So the advantage is when your darks are up against lights and your lights are up against something darker, the image has its projecting shape. It works. These are the hours, and here, probably in tempera painting, all of this is a water-soluble game where white has been added to many of the colors, and Arabic is the medium that's holding it down. It's the adhesive. But this isn't color as we know it. This is blues and greens and yellows and reds, and it's the whole 9 yards. And while it gives this medieval decorative piece its vitality, it's not color as we're going to be concerned with it later. This is very neutral. I'm assuming it's Guadi. I don't think it's Canaletto, but it's a Venetian 18th century view. The English used to buy one by each of these artists for the front hall, full of light, lots of reflected light in the shadows. But the colors are all very neutral, and it's brown school. We don't have any intense color. This is probably an Indian red. Very neutral. This is a Dutch 17th century underpainting. This is how the artists prepared the ground upon which they would paint the final piece. The idea is to keep it light enough so that when you lay glazes over this, do any of you know what a glaze is? If you take pigment, the likes of the pigment I showed you here, some pigments are transparent, others are opaque. If you take transparent colors, remember that green that I showed you that was so intense, and I spread it thinly, and the white from underneath came through, and it made it look even more intense? That's a glazing color. And if you add varnish and medium to that, so that it's like a layer of glass through which you can see the white underneath, that's called glazing. So if you model this woman's cape and then you lay a alizarin crimson over that, so you've got this red violet cape, you could lay a French ultramarine over this and it would be a blue skirt, but all the folds would be there because you could see through the glaze to the elaborate underpainting and shapes that have been set up in the underpainting. All right? So you have solved the problem of your dominant vertical, your dominant diagonal, your dominant horizontal. You've got an arabesque running through this. You've got all the elements of a piece, and you have the highest contrast in your subject. And he's being very daring because you come into this piece along that diagonal. That's the Baroque diagonal. And the moment you hit her, she addresses your attention to the cripple and his lady friend. I don't know quite what they're up to. I guess they're dancing. Yeah, and these are all in a festive costume for some saint's day or other. It's a brown school underpainting. And this is the overlapped squares. That's the rebated square with the 45-degree angles here. And this is a root 4. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4 here. There's all of your geometry. You see the eyes, her mouth, this figure. All of these things fall on major divisions. And here, there's been some heightening with white. But for the most part, this is ready to receive the glazes. And then you scumble color on top of that. And in some cases, you drag color on top. And it's called dead painting because you can't see through it. This is Chardin. Now, he's a brown school painter. He's turn of the 19th century. In spite of the fact that Boucher and Fragonard were all the rage among the aristocracy, he was the president of the Academy. He was so highly regarded for his still life and genre painting, which is admirable that they respected him when he wasn't showing the naked backsides of little Irish courtesans, which was what was so popular at the time. This is highly stylized. It's classical in the extreme. There are no details. There's no texture. It's pure shape. It's brown school. There's a little bit of blue here, a little bit of intensity throughout, very little. It's so beautifully modified. It would take you a long time, even with a brown school palette, to mix up values as delicately organized as Chardin has organized these. This is a dark figure on a light ground, a light figure on a dark ground. Wonderful. There's a relationship between this on a diagonal and it's on a 45-degree angle, and the other 45 is coming in here. Do you see it? Beautifully designed. Anyone who paints still life talks about how indebted they are to Chardin. Millet, Barbizon School, very concerned with the hard life of the working peasants in the field. These figures are designed in a hemisphere. It's brown school. He's reducing the contrast as he moves back. He's increasing the contrast and the intensity of color. Very simple. He's contemporary with Monet and Manet, but he keeps a very simple palette, a very brown school palette. This is Corot. It's a landscape, as you can see, but good grief, there isn't detail in it. It is so broad. He used to do these highly finished, feathery, treed landscapes with nymphs frolicking through them. And he would show these every winter at the salon. They were large, they were expensive, he supported his family. But when he went back to Italy, he painted these lush, impressionistic landscapes in which the abstract qualities of dynamic design figured most importantly. This is all about how you unify a composition with radiating lines. I mean, the man's a giant. He's an absolute giant. If I come in here and I take that diagonal through, it hits here. Do you see it? And where it hits here, I can run this along there. And I can hit this and run it along there. I can come up and I can hit this and that, and where it hits here, I can drop a vertical and I get that falling here. Got it? If I If I take this over, I can come down and hit here and here and come down to this point, and from here I can come up to that. I can take this diagonal and it emanates from that point also. I can bring this up and it hits these. I can bring this up and run it to this. Where it hits, I can bring that down and hit this and hit that. This is the activity. He's interested in pure design. He's got such control over what he's doing, he can incorporate a range of rich, simple shapes of color. He's in the key of blue-violet. Everything is a warm green and orange, and he's keying it with that up there. But if you look at the quality of color throughout, you'll see how extremely delicate it is, how carefully mixed it is, and as you look at it, you begin to see compass swings, more compass swings. There's an arc coming through here and hitting there. This is coming through here. This is coming down this way. And these are called coincidences. This is all an arc. Oh, he's good. He's good. He's very good. Here he is again. Look at the relationship here. This comes from here and it hits that. It hits this. It hits that. It hits this and hits this point. Then we're coming from up here and we're hitting that to the dark spot. This is coming down. The clouds are radiating the same game. And in this, he's swinging this compass and that compass. He's running through here. He's running through there. The dynamics are so full of energy, so discrete. He isn't worrying about the third dimension. He develops this a little bit, and there are some hints of planes in that, but for the most part, it is a very two-dimensional painting, patches of color, just as this is for the most part. And we create more of it because we imagine the trees have volumes, the clouds have volumes, etc. Degas, as a young man, went to Rome. His family was wealthy. He didn't go on a Medici grant, as most of the students did, who had won awards and were sent to the Villa Medici, I guess it was in Rome. But he tagged along, and here's St. Peter's, and this is in the key of violet. All these yellow, greens, and oranges of low intensity, and this delicate violet in that field of yellow is resonating. Boy, you have to be able to reduce your color considerably, don't you? Notice, nobody's using raw color. This is Chevril. This is the old man. This is the fellow who, in this photograph, is still active as a scientist at the age of 103. And that's because you eat your spinach. Do you understand? Look at him. He's still very animated. And here is a student here in this class creating as full a range of color as he could, mixing it and going from grays over here to more intense colors on the other side, and trying to create a step ladder of, but what he's discovering is the most intense colors fall in unexpected places. Nobody prepared color for the painter. Nothing fits nicely. You've got to push and pull it to get what you need from it. This is from a book on Albers, on color, and the only nice thing about the book and Albers was the fact that the publishers spent a lot of money on the reproductions. But here you can see that the most intense yellow is here, the most intense red is there, the most intense blues are down here. Nothing is levels of intensity. Here we have a grayscale. It doesn't mean much. We just can't get color organized the way we want it. But you will do it with a Fletcher palette. So here is a plate from the Albers book on color, and it lies. He's saying these are your 12 steps of the wheel, and he's using yellow at the top and violet at the bottom. And he's saying if you mix yellow and red, you get orange. The hell you do. You get a neutral orange because if you mix two colors together, the product is not full intensity. Do you see it? This is as strong as that, and this would be weaker. The green would not be as green as this if you use yellow and blue. And if you use blue and red, it wouldn't be that intense violet. So we have to remember what the reality of mixing is. We've been talking about a color wheel, but many books will present you with this, which is a color sphere. And we have the blue and the orange, so we have orange, red, orange, red, violet, and so forth here. So we have a color wheel laid out on its side, and from the bottom to the top we have a grayscale from white to black. And if we mix blue with the central neutral, it'll diminish in intensity until we mix the orange with that neutral, and it comes out to full intensity on the outside of the equator. Are you understanding what I'm saying? It's not very valuable thinking this way, because we don't paint in a three-dimensional figure, we paint on a two-dimensional surface. But it's one way of looking at a color sphere. Here we look at it again. If we cut it in the middle horizontally, we see the grayscale at number 5. Here it is, we cut it vertically. We see the grayscale here, it would be white to black. And here we're coming from yellow through neutral to pure gray in the middle. You saw me mix those things. You now know how you can do the same. This is Oswald's, and he's got a colored solid, and it's a couple of pyramids. Now, a lot of these people were trying to create a means of presenting color theory so that engineers could employ it in industry. And Rood and Oswald and others and Munsell created these kinds of diagrams, and they attributed numbers to 1,000 different values that could be generated for the purposes of industry. I don't know how valuable any of this would be for you or I. I think we can stick with Fletcher, stick with a two-dimensional wheel, and get on with the business of thinking about how we're going to paint nature. This is a diagram showing you straight lines across the field, saying red and green are complementary opposites, blue and orange are, yellow and violet, but yellow and red violet and yellow and blue violet are split complementary colors, which means side by side they enhance each other without making them angry. And I said green and red, yellow and violet create angry, ugly relationships. Now, if red, violet, and yellow are pleasing, red, violet, and red, violet would be even more pleasing. Do you see it? The closer you get to a direct opposite, the more violent the relationship is. So here, if we mix these on the outside with the neutral, we get this secondary group and a tertiary group until everything is neutral. It's easy enough understood. I tried to demonstrate this to you as I mixed inside that triangle. Now, I showed you that if I put down a blue and I put a gray beside it, the light gray looked warm. One of the things that Chervil discovered was that if you have a yellow patch of color, your brain will respond by causing you to believe that it's surrounded by a violet halo. That's simultaneous contrast of color. If you're looking at a green, outside it will look warm. If you're looking at an orange, outside it will look blue. If you're looking at a green, it'll look reddish. Now this is actually printed to illustrate Chevreul's principle But when I do this looks warm, this looks yellow-orange, this looks cool, blue-green, this looks a little on the green side, this certainly looks violet, but you know the truth is these inside grays are all the same ink. So this is from Chevrill's book, and that book is still printed in facsimile. You can buy it. I don't think you need it. It's, you know, it's very detailed. It would have been more important when it was new. There are many books on color. Sargent does one called The Use and Enjoyment of Color by a fellow by the name of Sargent. You may get it for 15 cents secondhand. I think Dover stopped publishing it. It's a general overview of color theory. He touches on everything briefly. It's a very good reference. So we have the same gray in these two. In the blue, this looks yellow-orange. Does it look yellow-orange to you? Here, it tends to look blue. Simultaneous contrast. A gray beside an intense color will take on the appearance of the intense color's complementary opposite. Simultaneous contrast. This isn't a good diagram. If I look at the yellow up against the red, it cools this because green is seen. Do you see it happen? If I look at the yellow up against the blue, it intensifies the orange and yellow quality here. This looks very much more intense here and more orange here than it does here. Here, the blue-violet is tending to make it look more yellow. Here, the blue is making it look more orange. Are you with me? Can you see it? People like Albers and many of the constructionists devoted their whole lives to playing with blocks of color. I never found it very interesting. I understood the theory, and it seemed like a passion out of fashion. This is Dufy. Now you've got to figure he's sitting around with a whole bunch of young painters. They're discussing the principles of color theory. They're running back to the studios and they're saying, if I want this lady's dress to look more intensely red, I'm going to surround it with greens. If I want this yellow-orange to look more yellow-orange, I'm going to surround it with blue-violets. If I want this side of the boat to look cool, I'll put red. If I want this warm, I'll put blue. If I want to intensify that red circle, I'll pound on the greens. Then you pick it up, you take it down to the cafe, and everybody says, wow. It's not a good painting, but you get a feeling of the excitement that these people experienced as they read Chevrill and experimented with color. And this is the same reproduction, the same painting, reproduced in a different book. So what's it teach you? You want to see paintings, you go to museums, you don't look at books. You get three books by the same publisher, 3 different editions, the same book, and all the reproductions are warmer or cooler, more green, more blue. You have to go to the museum, and if they're under artificial light, how you say, you're screwed. Because the light is altering the appearance of the pigment, and again, it's the Johnny One-Note thing. So there's no evident relationship between these two. And here, the red should make this look greener, and so forth. And look at this blink. See, is that blinking for you? That's a complementary opposite, and it's not pleasant. But if you cover this with your finger, that would be an example of a painting in this key of red-orange. Okay? Cover that, close one eye, that's the key of red-orange. Do the same with the one below. You could say that's in the key of blue-green. See what I'm saying? This is the chorus and this is the soloist. There it is. Corny, point made, all right? Real corny. I mean, if Winford liked that, I hope his mother enjoyed it. But this is Mondrian. Now, Mondrian is an interesting case. I've always adored him. He's a little Dutchman painting dewy-eyed little dogs, sentimental little puppies, and paintings of windmills in Holland where he grows up. Then he goes to Paris, and when he's in Paris, he shifts entirely, and here he's been looking at the paintings of Van Gogh. He's besotted with Van Gogh's energy. He's interested in the key of red-orange, so he's painting a blue painting, and the red-orange is the minority entry. It's a soloist. He's got complete control over this simple program, and it's powerful. And he's playing with limbs that are radiating and swung with arcs. He's running all kinds of games through here. There's his dominant diagonal, his dominant horizontal. There really isn't a dominant vertical here, maybe here. But it's exciting. Like Dufy, he's having the time of his life. I said, these people are besotted with color. Morandi is a favorite of mine. The paint is so thin, it's so muted, everything in this painting is cool except the keynote. If you close one eye, you hold a pencil up and you cover that orange, everything looks dirty and dull and gray. And the minute you introduce the color note, bang, it comes alive. Isn't that lovely? At about this point, I tell a story about Morandi. He was visited early on in his career by a Roman critic. He lived in Bologna. He lived with two stepsisters, with two sisters, spinsters, in a railway apartment, a railway flat, which meant the toilet was in the toilet and bath was in the back of the apartment, and you had to go through the sisters' bedrooms to get to it, and vice versa. There was no corridor. It was just room against room against room. And he's living in this railway flat with his spinster sisters, and he has a studio there, and he's visited by this young Roman art student who's going to become an art critic. And the art student sees a painting on Morandi's easel, and he says, "Is that for sale? I think that's beautiful." Morandi says, "I'm sorry, it's not finished." And the art student says, "What's unfinished about it?" And Morandi said, "Well, when you spend your life adjusting the relationship between color intensity, value, and temperature, if the thing doesn't read right and balance to your eye, it's not right. And you have to worry it until you get it right." Well, every year or two, the young art student who became an art critic would visit Morandi and say, "How's that painting I want going?" And Morandi says, "I look at it every month or so, but I haven't figured out what to do with it yet." Well, the art critic visits every 3 or 4 years for a couple of decades, and then one day shows up and says, "Giorgio, pull out that painting. I'm not leaving till you finish it." The story goes that Morandi sat there staring at the painting. What you have to understand is the near edge of Morandi's easel had a mountain of paint scrapings. He would take a knife and he would scrape out a piece of paint that he'd put down and wipe it on the front edge of his easel, and over 60 years it became a mountain of paint. And he would put color down and scrape it off and put it down. He's standing there, and then the critic is writing about this experience, and he says, Morandi finally, holding his brush up against the offending spot, decides it's right, and he puts the touch down, and it was like somebody turned on an electric switch, and the whole painting came alive. And the fellow grabbed it, gave him his money, and ran. But this is the game. It's such a delicate balance, because all of the relationships in this piece have to cooperate to make this dark and light sing, and this warm and this field of cools roar quietly. So I want you to hold your hand, the palm of your hand up, cover all the red poppies, and look at the painting with one eye, and what you see is green on green on green on yellow green on blue green on green green. Now you expose the complementary opposite and look at the thing come alive. And what has Monet done? He's charged the underpainting with blue greens, yellow greens. Do you see it? To get this to scintillate, he's had to juxtapose split complements throughout. And the sky had to be a yellow-green. Pretty nice. Pretty simple. Point made. This is what you're going to do for homework for next week. Next week, you're going to do a grayscale. Now, I have a couple of these in the office. We'll dig up and wake up Ian later. You can buy them. They're $2.50 a piece. And I want you to create these bands. Look over here on this far wall. There are some examples of them over here. I want you to paint them. You can use black, or you can make a triadic neutral, and you'll know what that means when you finish reading the Fletcher. So I want white and black, and I want every one of them to look as if it goes from dark to light to dark to light to dark to light to dark to light, dark to light to dark to light. But I don't want the panel to change one bit. It will appear to be dark against the lighter and light against the darker, because that simultaneous contrast of value, where a dark approaches a light, the light will look lighter and the dark will look darker. The lightest place on that whole page is where the black comes up against this, because this looks very much lighter than that. You know it isn't. So there's a lot to learn, and if you don't know how to swear, this assignment's going to teach you, because this is not easy to get 7 shades of gray and black and white to give you this smooth transition. So you might do 3 or 4 of them, and when it's dry, chop them up and put the best sequence together. And I'll tell you whether they're any good next week. Also, I want you to lay out a palette in the key of red, orange, green, blue, violet. And I want you to draw this diagram on a piece of Canvatex. And then I want you to mix up all of these possible combinations and put them on the diagram on the Canvatex. Similar to what I've been doing here, but I really want you to live with it. And you can just put them where you believe they fall. Okay? So when we look at it, I can tell whether it's intense enough, too intense, or not intense enough. So if you work with dark elements, it's called low key. And if you work with all lights, it's called high key. Let's say you wish to make a painting of a pretty young girl with fair hair in a white blouse, sitting in front of a window box with a light curtain hanging behind her and the sun shining in the yard outside. Her hair is light, her complexion's light, her clothes are light, the curtain's light, the light is light. The only darks might be her nostril or her blue eyes. So the 2 notes of dark for the nostrils and the eyes, key it. Without a dark accent, it will look washed out and dead. White on white has no kick. But if there's a note to key it, a light note in a dark piece, a dark note in a light piece, it sets it off very nicely. Mood. When we looked at the green painting with the poppies by Monet, that green had a summery feeling, didn't it? So that was the mood. It was full summer, probably what? July, August, I don't know when poppies are in bloom. But it certainly hit it on a nail. So late in the afternoon, you might have a cool evening. You can get a temperature mood to summarize how you feel about that particular moment, and you control the value. This is what, more or less, what your homework's going to look like. You can put a number 5 gray all around, and that's what this was supposed to be. This is too light against this. This is too light against that. These two are too close together. This is not easy. As I say, you will learn a rich vocabulary of profane remarks. So we're once again looking at how black can make something look lighter here, and white can make the same thing look darker. And gray doesn't have much of a kick. So as we look around this gray, we see it interact with everything around it. Here it looks light, there it looks dark. It did not change. The relationship did. One of my students tried to figure out how many grays Miranda used in a painting. She was a silkscreen printer, so she had all of these values. She had about 25 values from black to white. She chopped them up and she was amazed. Miranda used this value for the ground plane and for this bottle and its outline, this frame and its outline, this outline. Gorgeous. Then he used this for the light here, and probably the same thing for the light there, and this for the gray here. Do you see how few values he used? Now, which of you can tell me why he limited himself to so few values? A gamut, yes, it's a gamut. That's what it is, but why did he do it? The challenge to the classical mentality is to use as little as possible to achieve everything. So he challenged himself to limit himself to 1, 2, 3 values. Or there might be 4. Pretty good. Pretty good. And Poussin did this, and Cézanne did this. Everybody. Monet, everybody. So the ingredients in a painting are a design for architecture. I showed you this when we were looking at the Corot landscapes. I showed you all the driving lines running through it, the coincidences and the arcs. Then the range of values, the limited number of values you use and how you use them addresses that level of design. And then color. And the color has the characteristics of value, intensity, and temperature. Here's Morandi again. This is his keynote. Zone 1, you've all been in drawing 1 with me. Zone 2, Zone 3, Zone 4, and Zone 5. What control! What organization! He did printing, and he taught printing in Bologna at the art school all his life because it was a craft. You could teach it without getting into arguments about philosophy or politics. And remember, most of his colleagues and contemporaries were fascists. Baccioni and the Futurists were all fascists. He didn't join that club. So we know from drawing 1 that to make an apple look like an apple, you don't make it look like the apple you see in the kitchen. You've got to transform it into a multi-valued, multi-plane mass, and then simplify it and make sure that you have a light, a halftone, a dark, a cast shadow, reflected light, etc. with passage. You have to select, you have to exaggerate, you have to refine. You cannot draw what you see. This is Elizabeth Darrow. She came from North Carolina. When she came, a friend of mine brought her here, and I understand that when they went down to the street and they sat on the stairs at the bottom of the steps, Elizabeth burst into tears. She'd been copying silks and satins in compositions, and she was selling her work for, this was 25 or 30 years ago, she was selling her work for $3,000 and $4,000 a piece. but she knew she couldn't draw, and she knew she couldn't paint. And she thought, she'd graduated from Rhode Island School of Design. She'd been a textiles designer for a while in Chicago. And now she was doing house painting and her own painting. And she sat there and she cried on the steps and she asked my friend, "Do you really think he can teach me to draw?" And she came. She came all the way up. She boarded her cat. And she postponed the houses she was going to paint. And she came here for 2 semesters. And at that time, I only had 1 floor. I was on the 2nd floor in this building. And she went out someplace and she bought, borrowed, or stole one of those horses you see street maintenance people putting up. And she set it up in the far corner and put a sign, "Woman at work, do not bother." And she remained there for 6 months. And when she finished, she had come to terms with you should have seen how bad her first drawings were. In 6 months, she learned to draw. And she did these exquisite paintings for the color course. If you're good boys and girls, I'll let you do this problem. It is a killer. It's 3 coats of paint. Underpaintings, the whole 9 yards. Passage, halos. I mean, there is the sphere in color. Do you see it? Yellow, red violets, blues, blue greens. It's the whole color wheel. Gorgeous. Open touches. Prepared underpainting. Can you see it? There are warms under all this. Quite an accomplishment. When she finished, we took all the 2nd semester's work. She framed it. We had an exhibition for her. She sold everything. She went home, having paid for the 2 semesters, all of her transportation and supplies, and a great deal of money in the bank. A real pro. But she worked 13, 14 hours a day. She showed these youngsters what it was like to be a serious artist. Here you're in the key of yellow, orange, and it's implicit in this. It's so quiet. Everything is cool, but the complementary opposite of blue violet, you see it in here. Look at how warm and orangey it looks there. Monet is painting in the key of red violet. This is the key. So though there are red violet touches on some of these water lilies, I'm going to ask you to bring a couple of fingers in and cover that, close your eye, and get used to the whole thing. And it's kind of bland and flat. A few of those red violet touches throb. You expose that and suddenly it comes alive. Do you see it? This technique of covering something to determine whether it's enhancing your work or destroying it is very useful. Key of yellow-orange. Monet. So if you hold your pencil up, close one eye, cover that, nothing's happening. It's quiet. The warm in the sky behind the lower conifers suddenly comes forward, doesn't it? Looks yellow-green, yellow-orange. Then you expose the sun on the grass, and she comes alive. Red, orange, the poppies again. Cover them, the place goes bland, expose it, it works. This is a problem. I should have mentioned this to him. I never had the courage. This is in the key of blue-violet. So everything is yellow-green. The problem is he's got a little bit too much blue-violet down here. Red-violet, rather. Blue-violet. Cover this, and that becomes important. Do you see it with one eye closed? That really sings. You expose this, and that dies, and the other doesn't come alive. Please, don't tell his mother I said that. And here he's playing with the yellow-green, but there's too much of it. You cover all of this, and that sings beautifully. Do you see it? You almost have to cover all of that and this too. That's it. That works. This bit works, none of the other does. Now remember, we're not looking at pigment. We're looking at ink in a book that's been photographed. It's 4th generation. This won't approach the painting. But it gives us a starting point for some of our discussions. And there have been people who've learned a good deal about painting studying with me, even though you don't probably believe it. So the key of yellow, blue, violet, red, or yellow, red, violet, blue. So you always have 2 alternate keys. So you've got 12 points or 24 different keys on 4 levels of intensity, okay? This is going to be next week's assignment. So please eat your Wheaties and do some push-ups. You're going to need all your strength and fortitude for this one. We're going to fill the whole diagram with colors, and we're principally interested in the central neutrals. And this is an enlargement of Elizabeth's painting, and you can see the reflected warms in that cast shadow. And this is a student doing the same problem and rendering it with a knife. Pretty good. I wish we had more light on this. Those colors are gorgeous. You're going to discover so much about color that you never imagined existed, thanks to Frank Morley Fletcher and M. Richard Barnstone, Esquire. And then this is going to be your second assignment with an underpainting. And this will probably be your third. I'm giving you abstract designs because I want you to turn this into a bowing forward segment of a cylinder. I want you to get this to go behind that frame. I want this to go from neutrals to warm oranges and red oranges and violets and blue violets. I want this to go from neutral, throwing that forward, to neutral here, throwing this forward, and this coming ahead of all of those violets and looking yellow-green. So we're going to push and pull space through the use of contrast of value, warm and cool colors, and underpaintings. This is all underpainted in blues, so it scintillates. This is a killer of an assignment. I haven't had anybody do this in years. And here, you might play with some mixes and see what you can discover, as I did in this briefly. This is tertiary mixtures. These are all neutral colors. Do you see how delicate this is? Oh boy. Strong color people don't use. People just don't use raw color. Isn't that lovely? Look. Isn't that gorgeous? Look at how we go down this path. There's a couple standing there. All of this goes back. This flowering tree comes forward. The roses. Lady has a white hat on. Isn't this something, huh? There she is again, see her? Isn't that controlled? This goes back, this comes forward. These are the closest to you. There's another couple back here. What a lovely, rich, what control? What a sense of atmosphere, space, depth, even volume. This is Judy Fritschman. These schools are keying everything. It's a very large painting. If any of you are closely associated with a church and you'd like to bring some of Judy's work in to have an exhibit in your church, her work is very Christian in orientation. She's dealing principally with women from the Old and New Testament, and her stuff is gorgeous. I've begged her to make posters and greeting cards with them. She hasn't done it. Isn't that lovely? Kia blue, blue violet. This is Sid McGinley's. She's been associated with the studios for about 40 years. She's ranked as one of the top 150 master pastellists in the United States. She's appearing again on Pastel Journal, which is the foremost pastel publication in this country. She's appearing on its cover with an article for the 4th time. Beautiful stuff. Really, really very good. She works in pastels, and when people see her work, they assume it's oils. She shows with the Artist House in Philadelphia. I think she has a show there now. I would like you to make a value step scale. You might have to make 2 or 3 of them, and when they're dry, chop them up and paste them together to get a pleasing enough set of value changes. I've given you an assignment and I've given you codes. I'm hoping I clarified what they mean. Who can tell me what this up here is? What's the one on the top?
Blue, green.
No.
Red orange.
Red orange. It's pointing to 9 o'clock. What's the one below it? Number 7.
Blue violet.
Yeah, well, tell me more about it, because I've given you 3 pieces of information in that coded mark. What's it say? It says blue violet, medium what? Medium intensity. What else? Number 7 value. Pretty dark, huh? What's the bottom one? 4. What's that one down here?
It's a very neutral blue violet.
Yeah,
That's fairly.
it's a blue violet, almost gray, almost, and it's a number 4 value. Now, the key is, you've got to lay out red, orange, green, blue, violet. That's the palette I used tonight. And you don't have to mix up all the colors. You only have to mix up enough color to do this. Yes,
You said red, orange, green, and blue violet?
that's right, at the bottom, red, orange, green, blue, violet. And you have a text to buy. I'm charging $12 for the text. I've got them in the office. And you can buy these wheels. Not buy, you'll get one when you get it. And you can chop this up and set it so you can turn it to red, orange, green, blue, violet, because that's what I'm asking you to use. And you'll have an option of 7 colors and white, but you only need to mix up those that you need. Let me illustrate this for a moment, because this is very important. In the middle, it says red, orange, pretty high intensity, number 4, going to neutral at number 5. At the bottom, it's 6, at blue, violet, low intensity. I'm going to mix up this color. Then I'm going to mix up this color, and then this one. And I've got this little narrow panel, right? So I'm going to take some of this, and I'm going to put 2 rows across, and I'm going to take a little of this and mix it in here, put 2 rows across. I'm going to put a little bit more in here, 2 across, a little bit more. And when I get done about halfway, I'm going to start mixing this into that. and poco a poco, it's going to change very delicately. It'll pass through a neutral, going from this warm to that cool. It'll go right through the middle of the whole program. So that's the way you have to think of these mixtures.
So what would the floor be at the bottom?
The bottom is blue-violet, number 6 value, very neutral. Do you see it? Here.
Oh, that one. No, I'm talking about the floor at the very bottom of the very.
Oh, this is a very low intensity blue-violet at a number 4 value. Now how do you start it? You don't start with the color. You don't start with the blue-violet. You mix up the value, the number 4. Now when you add a tiny, this is going to be very low in intensity, right? Why should you pour out strong color? You're going to be throwing it all away. You mix up the number 4 value. You add the tiniest touch of blue-violet to it until you figure it just moved away from the dead neutral center enough to keep Myron smiling. Okay? Then you're set. If when you added the blue-violet, it changed it from a number 4 to a number 5, you add a little bit more white to bring it back up. Then you go to your next color, you match that to the requirement, and then when you have the 3 colors, you mix one into the other until you're coming down, you mix the third into the beginning, and you're in business. And your touches are side-by-side touches because you saw the quality of touch. Now, I've got small brushes in the office for sale. If you have comparably small brushes, fine. They have to be about, I don't know, just under a 1/4 of an inch wide, maybe a 1/2 inch long, flats. So when you put down a touch, it's a little block of color. Myron likes that. You've only got one person to please here. You're lucky. So you're going to do a value step scale. You're going to do this simple diagram. No underpainting. Mix your color, put it right on the Canvatex. Now, you need to buy a box like a box that shirts used to come in. You might have to manufacture it, but what you want is something that will allow you to carry a wet painting in the car and not get it all over yourself. So if you have a box that looks like this, and it's got a cover, and we have a cutaway view of it like this, and we put one of these little grommets, you know, you push it through a hole and you bend it, and you have a piece of cardboard here. And you lay your Canvatex, and because there's always a white border around, an unpainted border around the outside, you can put little bulldog clips or just paper clips to hold it. You put the cover on it. You put it under your arm. It can't fall forward. It can't get messed up. You can't blame the cat, you know. And when you get here, you take them out, you put them on the wall, and we'll discuss them compassionately, respectfully, more or less. Are there any questions?
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry, I don't really understand yet how you have laid out this second color scale that we're supposed to make with the red, orange, green, blue, violet scale. How these particular, I know the 5 and 6 and the 7, I know that refers to the intensity of the color, like the dark and the light. Right?
The value.
Value, I'm sorry, okay. But
No.
The actual place that you have, the dot actually
whether it's a single dot with no leg on it,
Right.
it's dead neutral. It's a number 5 gray. It's a number 3 gray. It's dead neutral. It's the middle of the wheel. Okay? And if it's pointing to noon, it's yellow. And if the mark is very close to the dot, it's a very weak yellow. If it's all the way out to the end, it's been kicked up 2 notches. It's very, very strong. So the bar denotes intensity, strength or weakness. Its proximity to the dot or the outside edge. The number denotes value on your value step scale, 5 being a middle gray, etc. So you've got intensity, and the time on the clock is the wheel, and if it's pointing to 3 o'clock, you're looking at blue-green. Right?
Gotcha, thank you.
Yeah, that's all right. You've got to, you know, some of these people have been suffering me for years. You're new to this abuse, got it?
So when we're making grays for the gray scale, you want us to mix 3 colors together rather than mix 1 and white together?
I don't want you to use black and white because it has no color properties. I want your grays to be a product of the triad. But I said, you will not use a light yellow, you'll use a raw umber, as close to black as you can get. You won't use cadmium orange, you'll use burnt umber. So you're going to need some of those cheap earth colors for making your neutrals. Later, if you don't need something that dark, you can use lighter colors. You will learn how flexible this is. You saw Judy Fritzman's pieces and Sid's pieces, and you've seen the color here at the studios. These people know what they're doing. Thanks to Fletcher and my abuse. Yeah.
So we'll need to buy white, but not black.
That's
for
right.
the colored scale piece.
Look,
Mix all.
if you're having that much trouble getting neutral, spring for black and hope I don't notice.
I have
more
one day to do this. So.
My feeling is this. My feeling is this. The gray scale, I don't care what you use. I want you to adjust these so that the transition from light to dark is uniform and there's the same jump from dark to light at each step, that it doesn't get too dark or too light. That, you've got to train your eye for value. That's the purpose of the exercise. How you arrive at it. You know, if somebody does a good job with black and white, they've done a good job, period. Yeah, it'd be nice if they used a triadic neutral, but I'll punish them anyway.
So then which white we use for the colors?
I'd recommend probably flake white. Flake white is what artists use for flesh tone. Titanium white a little bit whitens and lightens a great deal. So you get these sudden jumps when you add a little bit of white to it. Flake white isn't very strong, so when you add it to a mix, instead of getting too light too quickly, you can control the lightening. So you probably want a tube of flake and of titanium.
Is that carried? It's not carried at the AC Mall places.
Well, it might not be because flake white, I believe, is lead.
So would Dick Blick have such?
They might have a flake white substitute, some compromise.
Do you have a recommendation of where to shop?
The only people around here that sell color is Blick's. There's no place else.
Okay.
If you're going into Philly, you've got a whole bunch of art supplies because there are art schools and studios and artists in the community, etc. Yeah.
This is an unrelated question, but you're talking about the ultramarine blue, right? And I know this is something we're talking about today, but how does that compare with the cobalt blue? You don't use the cobalt?
I tend not to use cobalt blue. I'm not really too familiar with it because I find French ultramarine does beautifully. If from your point of view, cobalt blue gives you a lovely blue violet, and you're beginning to see what real blue-violet is as this goes on, use it. Might punish you, but use it. No more questions. How are you doing? It's good stuff, isn't it? Good for you. How old are you? 16. 16. Yeah, good for you. Ladies and gentlemen, that ends this first lesson in Painting 1, and I thank you for your patience and attention. Drive carefully, please. May your gods go with you.